Okay, the best thing to do when trying to do a works cited citation is to follow the slip that our librarian, Mrs. Heffley, has made for us. My recommendation to you is to actually print out one of these slips and fill it out before you type out the citation. I know some of you guys will try to use citation generators like EasyBib, and I get it, but please understand that EasyBib does not always get it right, especially when you have kind of trickier text like March Book 2 has a couple of interesting things that we're going to do it together. But EasyBib sometimes adds extra names in the authors that aren't actually authors and does all sorts of weird things. So the best thing you should do is to follow the slip. So let's go through what goes on the slip. Okay. The first thing will be the author. Okay. Also notice that at the end of each line, there's the proper punctuation. So after the author is going to be a period. But let's talk about the author for a second. The author must be an actual person's name. CNN staff, even if you're on a website that's like the CNN website and it says, oh, this was written by the CNN staff. So that's not a person's name, so it doesn't count as the author. Okay, an author has to be an actual person's name. If you don't have an author's name, leave it blank. Okay, you just move on to the next thing. And that's true for all of the pieces on this particular citation template. If you don't have something, you move on and leave it blank. So no author, leave it blank. But for books, you will have authors, okay? So it should not be blank there. It should be formatted as last name, comma, first name, okay? But if you have two authors, for example, with March Book 2, you have two authors, then you would do last name, comma, first name, comma, and the second author as first name, last name. Okay, so something that looks like this: McFly, comma, Jared, comma, and Christiana Lee. If you have three or more authors, which I don't think you will have for the books that you're using on this assignment, but if you have three or more authors, then you would put the first author listed, McFly, comma, Jared, comma, et al. Okay, et al means and everybody else. Okay, and then you end the author with a period. The second thing you need to think about is the source title. This would go in quotation marks, but here's the thing, books, and you'll be referencing books for this assignment, they don't have a source title, only a container title, which we'll talk about in a second. So you'll actually skip number 2 for hard copy books like this, okay? Source title is the title of like small works, like articles, poems, short stories, things like that. But books are big enough that they don't have source titles because you're using the entire thing, okay? Then you end a source title with a period, but again, you probably won't need that for this particular assignment. The important one is the container title. This is the title of the place where you found your information or article, okay? So if you found an article in a book, then the book is the container title, the article is the source title. If you found your article on a website, the article title would be the source title. The website itself is the container. That's where you found that information. So the website would be the container title. For you guys and books, you would use the title of the book. And this goes in italics. You should always have a container title because you should always have a place where you found your information, okay? For the purpose of this assignment, all of your information are coming from books, so this is the place that you found your information. This is the container. That's the container title would then be the title of the book. If you're citing something smaller like an article or a poem that's found in a book, then you would end this one with a comma. But since it's a book itself, you're basically putting your container title up in number 2, source title, so you would actually put a period. Okay, but it still gets italics, and this time it would get a period. Other contributors. These also need to be actual names of people. If you have them, you include them. If you don't have them, you skip. Okay. These are people like editors or illustrators, okay? Sometimes books will have like 30 editors. If you have 30 editors listed, you can either do edited by and then put the first person listed and then put et al., or you can simply leave that blank. If they have 30 editors, and that's probably okay to leave it blank. Notice that it says these are people like illustrators. For March Book 2, we have an illustrator because there are pictures. So that's something that we will want to include in March Book 2 citation. When you have other contributors, you have to actually spell it out, meaning you have to say illustrated by. You can't just add other contributors and put their names and then not tell what they actually did, okay? When you have other contributors, you need to put what they did, and then put their name. So illustrated by, and then put that person's name. And that person's name does not go last name, comma, first name like the author. Instead, you just write it out first, then last name. And you end this one with a comma. Version and number. These have to be actual numbers. So you can't have like the paperback version or, the green light version or whatever it is. It has to be version number 2 or number 3 or whatever. And these are kind of uncommon. So if you have them, include them. If you don't, then skip this. Again, most of the time, these are really only present in really large textbooks. Okay. And then end with a comma. Publisher, you should have a publisher. This is the group that produces the information, and then you end with a comma. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to find the publisher. Publication date, you're going to find and include the most recent date or year. For books, typically you're just going to have a year. And if you only have the year, then only include the year. Otherwise, you would include the full date, and you write it out very similarly to the way that you write out your date in the heading, where you put the number, then the full month, then the full year. However, again, most of the time with books, you'll really only get a year. And then you end that with a comma. Location, this is important. Location does not refer to a geographical location. So if it says like publisher is in New York, New York, that's not the location. Okay, location is not a physical geographical location. Location can only be one of two things, either a website URL, which with books you don't have that, or page numbers. With books, you have page numbers, okay? And you only include the page numbers if there's just a few pages there that you're using. If you're using like page 4, page 27, page 33, page 46, like if you're using a bunch of different pages from the book, don't include them. But if you're only including like pages 33 through 35, then you would include them, okay? You would write them out like this. If you're only using one page from the entire book, in your work, then you would put 1P, period, and then the page number 23. If you have more than one page that you're using, you put 2Ps to indicate multiple pages, and then the numbers of pages. So PP, period, 23 through 25, and then you end with a period. One thing that's important is no matter where your citation ends, let's say you don't have a location because you're not going to put page numbers, then wherever it ends, your citation must end with a period. There must be a period at the end of your citation. So even if your citation ends at publication date, put a period, okay? Even if it says to put a comma, no matter what, wherever your citation ends, put a period, okay? So let's do a sample citation for March Book 2. Most of the time, you can find your publishing information and all the information you need at the beginning of the book. March Book 2, like to switch it up, they went all the way to the back. So that's on the back page. But the page should look kind of like this. Okay. Again, most books, this will be at the beginning of the book, but for March Book 2, they switched it up for us. So the author, we have two authors. We have John Lewis and Andrew Aiden, and we write it like this: Lewis, comma, John, comma, and Andrew Aiden, period. Okay. There's no source title because this is a book as a whole, but we do have a container title, and we need to put that in italics, and we call it March Book 2, period. Okay. Other contributors. There is another contributor for this one. There is an illustrator, and it says so on this last page here. It says illustrated by Nate Powell. Then I put comma because it gives us one singular editor-in-chief. It says edited by, and then it would be Chris Staros. There is another editor down at the bottom, but we're going to include the most important one, the chief one, editor-in-chief. Okay, so then a comma. Version and number, I don't see any there, so we're just going to skip that. And then publisher is Top Shelf Productions, and that you can find on that last page again. Publication date, the most recent publication date would be 2015, so I'll put a comma, and then I'm just going to show you if I were to put page numbers, and I would, if I'm only going to use a couple pages out of this book, then I would put PP period 47 to 48 period, okay? But if I'm going to use a bunch of different pages from this book, then I might take that last part out and just put a period after 2015. Okay, now that I've filled out my citation template, then I just need to type it out so that it looks like this. Okay, you put it all together and you type it out directly like this. Notice that I don't put the X's where I left things out. I just simply skip them. Okay, also notice I typed it in Times New Roman 12-point font and I have my hanging indent. And that's how you do a citation.